So welcome back. I think we're all back. So let me welcome Isabel and Jasper, who's online, to lead us through the next paper, which is on the LCE. So do I hand it over to you, Isabel, or do I hand over to Jasper? Okay, Jasper, over to you.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for the opportunity to present to the SAC on the ISAF LCE. So before we discuss the standard, I will first introduce myself. So I'm Jasper van den Hout, and I'm a director at the IAASB. And as mentioned, Alan, look, I'll present this together with Isabel Reich. So the goal of today's session is twofold. First of all, we will provide you with an overview of the adoption and implementation activities that we have done so far for the ISAF LCE. And then secondly, we'll seek your views on how we can further promote the global adoption and implementation of the standard. So with that, let's dive into it. And I will start with the background of this project and the project status. Can we go to the next slide, please? So why was a standalone standard developed by the IAASB? The reason for that is the small and medium-sized entities make a crucial contribution to the global economy, with an estimated 90% of entities across the world being small and medium-sized. Audits of financial statements of less complex entities are often conducted for a variety of reasons, including being legally required, to ease access to credit, and to support management needs. Although the ISAs are designed to be applied to a wide variety of entities with differing circumstances and also different sizes, the IAASB has heard increasing concern about the length, complexity, and the understandability of the ISAs. Then, in addition to that, some jurisdictions have developed or are considering developing their own solutions. So the IAASB decided to develop the ISAF LCE to help address these matters. The goal of the standard is to meet the needs for audits of less complex entities and providing a global solution to help auditors undertake consistent and effective high-quality audits. Next slide, please. So looking at the timeline, in 2017, we started the information gathering activities with a roundtable in Paris. At that time, we were looking at different options. Developing a separate standard was one of them, but we also considered making enhancements to the ISAs to make them more scalable. We also considered developing more guidance outside the ISAs. For example, a non-authoritative guide of how you can use the ISAs for a less complex entity. So based on input from the roundtable and on a discussion paper, the IAASB decided to develop a separate standard. For this separate standard, the project proposal was approved in December 2020. Within 3 years and 2 exposure drafts later, the final standard was approved in September 2023. And then after certification of due process by the PIOB, the standard was published last year in December. And since then, we haven't been sitting still. Next slide, please. So since December 2023, we have been developing material to help the implementation and adoption of the standard, as we understand that these matters can be challenging in practice. For the ISAF LCE, it can even be more challenging, as there is an additional step of adopting the standard, and it affects the whole audit. Therefore, we are developing materials to help the adoption and implementation. So far, we have developed a fact sheet, a frequently asked question document, and a presentation deck. These documents were published at the same time as the standard to help answering initial questions and to raise awareness. After that, we've developed a 3-part video series. The first video highlights the benefits of using the standard, and the second video explains for which audits the ISAF LCE can be used. Then the third video is a walkthrough of the standard, explaining what is included in each of the parts. Lastly, earlier this month, we created a global webinar, which was attended by over 600 participants. And this is not everything we plan to do. If you can go to the next slide. So in the second quarter, so in this quarter, we plan to publish more documents, an adoption guide, a supplemental guide on the authority, and a supplemental guide on reporting. We developed the adoption guide as jurisdiction must first adopt the standard. Although there is not a perfect recipe for adopting the standard, we thought some common steps that can be used by jurisdictions when embarking on this journey. The supplemental guides provide more background for users of the standard, so for the auditors. The guide includes many more examples, which were purposely kept out of the standard to keep the standard concise. And lastly, I would like to highlight that we have been and we will continue to participate in regional outreach activities and liaise with IFAC. With respect to the former, we think it's important to participate in these events to promote the adoption of the standard and to raise awareness. So for example, 2 weeks ago, we have participated in an event from the EFAA, and we plan to do another event in Asia too. On the liaison with IFAC, we have regular calls set up with IFAC to share insights in the adoption of the standard and also to discuss what else we may be able to do to enhance the adoption. So this was the background of this project and the project status. Next, Isabel will explain what the key benefits of the standard are and the identified challenges to adopt the ISAF LCE.
Thank you. Michelle, if you want to go to the next slide. So as Jasper mentioned before, we are in the adoption and implementation phase of the standard. One of the steps is really to adopt the standard in the jurisdiction, and to make that step happen, it requires consensus between so many stakeholders. We're talking national standard setters, regulators, professional organization, the firms, and to reach that consensus, it's really easier when one organization takes the lead and bring that topic to discussions. To help out with the discussions, we've put out some materials that highlights the benefits and promotes the standard. If we go to the next slide. So the first benefit that we want to highlight is that the standard is proportionate and tailored to the need of an LCE. It doesn't mean that it's a lesser audit, it just means that it's focused on the topics that are relevant to the LCE. It contains all the requirements that will be relevant, and all the essential explanatory materials are relevant and applicable to the LCE. The standards is also easier to navigate because it only contains the requirements that are relevant. And it's also following the flow of an audit, going from client acceptance to the conclusion, which is a little bit different than the full suits of ISAs. And then we thought it will be easier for smaller firms to be able to read and apply. The second benefit, if you want to move to the next slide, is around the level of assurance that the standard obtains. So as I mentioned, it contains all the requirements that are important for an auditor that performs an audit of an LC to obtain reasonable assurance. It will reduce the risk level to a minimum so that it can provide an audit opinion on the financial statements. It is the same level as the ISAs, and yeah, so it's the same level. Next slide. Another benefit that we want to highlight is about the maintaining confidence in the financial reporting of LCE. So just like an audit conducted using the ISAs, it provides the trust that markets and investors need when making a decision. Also, being a global standard, it helps reduce the risk of jurisdictional divergence by driving consistency and comparability globally. So having said that, if you want to go to the next slide, please, Michelle. Having said that, we have done some outreach at the beginning of the year. And also, as Jasper mentioned, we have liaised with IFAC, who has also reached out to their jurisdiction to understand what the intention of each jurisdiction is towards the ISAs for LC and what are their concerns. And we have identified some challenges. One of the concerns is around the nature of the standards. So regulators have voiced their concern around the ability to obtain reasonable assurance when using the ISA for LC. There's still a perception in the market that it is a lesser audit, or meaning less audit work, and less quality. There is the perception that the ISA for LC creates a two-tier audit in the audit profession, and that it could create confusion in the market. It could also impact the lender's willingness to accept an audit performed under the ISA for LC because of that perception. Another concern or common concerns that are raised by audit firms are because of the uncertainty of the potential efficiency gains. So large firms have already developed their own methodology using the scalability that is integrated in the full suite of ISAs, and therefore don't see the need to develop another methodology that addresses the needs of an audit of an LCE. Smaller firms don't have the resources or the capacity to develop their methodology that it will end up being also similar. There is a risk too, because of that perception, or that it will discourage small firms from entering the PI market because they will be specialized only in the ISA for LCE market. In addition to those, there's a concern around the costs. So maintaining 2 sets of auditing standards for firms that includes education, translation, the development and maintaining of methodologies, all that are recurring themes that we hear when doing outreach. The last concern that is on the slide is about transitioning in and out of the ISA for LCE. So this has been raised since the exposure draft. There are some measures that have been taken since, so we have increased the scope. For example, we included accounting estimates now and group audits to limit that risk of being in a situation that you have to transition mid-engagement between the ISA for LCE and the ISA, but it's still something that is worrisome for the practitioner. Another important point is that some jurisdictions don't see the need to adopt the ISA for LCE, either because they have high threshold for statutory audits, so they wouldn't be in that market anyway. There are some jurisdictions that have a large market for review engagement, so there's not a need for audits of an LCE. They use review engagement standard instead. Or some jurisdictions actually saw the need for an auditing standard focused on the need of an LCE, so they've developed their own standard. So there's some example of that too. So they don't need to adopt the global one. So if we go to the next slide. So now we're, in order to help us develop the appropriate material and also further promote the ISA for LCE, we're just looking for some input from the SAC members to understand what are the challenges and then what we can do to further encourage people to adopt the ISA for LCE. So Alan, I can take it over. You can take it.
Thanks, Isabel. Yes, I think it's good to stop there, get some input before we go to the next issues and questions you have for us. So who would like to start? Could I just, as somebody who is not an auditor, can I just ask, when you call it an LCE, does that linked, because you mentioned thresholds, I would assume that you can have a large company that is not complex.
Yeah. Correct. So the authority of the standard has some specific prohibitions. So publicly traded entities or listed entities will not be part of it. There's also qualitative characteristics, but there's no defined threshold. Okay. It is encouraged, or the standard anticipate that jurisdiction will put the thresholds that are relevant in their jurisdiction, but on its own, the standard itself doesn't have set thresholds.
So would there be a standard definition of an LCE that will be applicable? So, you know, you go out to the street and say, I've got an LC standard, and people will know what an LC and how do you define it?
There's no global, do you want to? There's no global definition. We have looked at, a lot of jurisdictions have some definitions that they use for other purposes. It would be grant, like assistance, or statutory audits, but the definition differs by jurisdiction, and it's I don't think we can have a global one because of the difference in the market.
Maybe, Tom, Alan, if I can just add to that. So Isabel is quite right. There's no distinct definition of a less complex entity. So what we try to do in the authority of the standard is we have 3 layers. We say there are certain entities that are just off the bat prohibited to ever use this standard, like listed entities. And then there are a set of qualitative characteristics. And we say these are the type of characteristics that should be exhibited for an entity to be considered a less complex entity. And then we also anticipated, like Isabella said, that there are various definitions of small and medium entities across jurisdictions, which are by their nature may be used for a different purpose, but which jurisdictions could also leverage to decide for themselves which are the entities they would like to use this. So they can refine in their own jurisdiction by, for example, introducing thresholds in terms of which are less complex entities. Now, what is very important to remember is that we spend quite a lot of time as a board to make sure that we target, if you think about entities on a spectrum of complexity, we are not saying less complex entities are entities that are not PIEs. That's not how you should be thinking about this. Listeds and PIEs and those type of entities are towards the upper end of the spectrum of complexity. We are targeting a very narrow range of entities towards the bottom end of the spectrum. So it's not that anything that's not a listed or a PIE is a less complex entity. Now, a less complex entity is only those entities that exhibit these characteristics towards the lower end of the spectrum of complexity.
Thank you. Tom, did you want to?
Just to add, it's not much different too. We're not talking about the whole SME population, but SMEs are defined differently in different jurisdictions for different matters. So it's not a disqualifying characteristic of the standard by any stretch, but it was really important for us as a board to reach a common understanding of what was in and what was out, because we were then trying to effectively make the standard proportionate and filter out things that would not be relevant for those type of entities that we've effectively scoped into the standard.
In the jurisdictions that I know, for instance, we use LCs for NGOs. For NGOs, at least, you know, they are, most of them, they use limited LCs.
Doug?
Going to the questions in a sense, the challenges. So perhaps I should start by saying, being transparent, despite local work done by the board, in Australia, our board decided not to adopt the LCE standard, and perhaps if I explain the reasons, some of them have already been covered. You know, 2 sets of standards that auditors need to learn, perceptions of 2 levels of audit, but there's more to it than that. Flowing from the 2 levels of audit, perceptions that audited entities will seek fee reductions, even though the level of work should be the same. Also, each jurisdiction is different in terms of which entities are required to report and have audits or reviews, as was touched on. So, for example, in Australia, there's 2.5 million companies, which sounds a lot for a population of 30 million, but only 25,000 entities are actually required to report. Not all of them are required to have audits. So each jurisdiction is going to have different differential requirements for reporting and audit and assurance to start off with. There's also a question about scalability to full standards, you know, the CUSP project. We've also got a standards portal which makes the full suite of standards more accessible. Other issues, I'll just keep going, and don't take this as a necessary criticism, I'm just trying to explain the reasoning here. A large part of the smaller entities that might have been eligible to use this in Australia are very small pension funds with 5 or fewer members. They actually use administrators, custodians, and so forth, and the standard doesn't actually cater for service organisations. So that's an interesting dimension in itself. There were questions about the timeliness of the updates, and also the fact that the document is actually 158 pages long as an LCE standard. And you sort of touched on it, it's focused on the entity, not the auditor, in a sense. So I just thought it was useful to give that background, because that perhaps feeds into some of these questions about adoption, whether or not you can address them, and perhaps a question back, which is the objective that every country should adopt them, or is it available for countries where perhaps it's most suited? I guess that's an interesting question. Perhaps I should stop there, though.
Thanks, Doug. Any place?
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll talk from a Swedish perspective on this issue. if you recall the very beginning of this project many years ago, it was a Nordic initiative that at that time was kind of viewed with kind of suspicion. An audit is an audit. But we were happy that this has now been finalized. As for the Swedish environment, being a preparer representative, we have supported this initiative from the very beginning together with the profession. And that's probably a key part on also explaining where we are right now. So we also have been in dialogue, both from the industry side and from the audit profession, with the regulator during a long time, to having conversations with the regulator. And what will happen now in Sweden is that the regulator will make a pronouncement to say that, just one step back, the regulator does not set the auditing standards. That's for the profession to set, but they can uphold the standard, of course. But they will, in a kind of memorandum, say that we have now noted that the ISAFRS has been adopted, and we've basically say it's fit for purpose. Therefore, we assume that it can be used as an option within the framework, within the limits, within the authority that it is set in the standard. So in that sense, also, you therefore automatically pay way for the market, so it can be applied. So the experience here is that what can be done, it's important to work closely with the regulator in order to achieve adoption. So finish up, it will be implemented in Sweden, it can be used.
Thanks, Claes. Monica, as an SMP working with lots of LCEs.
And indeed accompanying this discussion for a certain period of time, I'll try to bring my experience related mainly to Brazil's discussion. So maybe this might bring a perspective on what happens. Since the beginning, there was always a discussion on what was stated here as the ability to obtain reasonable assurance. And this came mainly from the listed companies' regulators. So the discussion that remains somehow existing is the following: okay, but this standard doesn't apply to this PIEs or regulated entities. So it's kind of nonsense on having this argument. From the profession, the accounting profession regulator that issues the standards there, the initial approach is to approve. The intention is to have the standard approved, and exactly as you were mentioning, to include more concrete situations or references in which this might be applicable or not. And in Brazil and in Latin America, indeed, we have a lot of entities which certainly would apply to the concept of less complex, independently of size and so on. And also on the discussion on the costs associated and adjusting the systems or the material that is done, what I have been hearing is basically the concern on those very small audit firms that don't use any ERPs, because independently of larger firms who have already their own ERPs developed from a global perspective and that consider adopting it in a way, but for medium and not so small firms, usually they use ERPs, and these international audit ERPs are already starting working to get adjusted to use the LCE. So probably the main impact from what we are hearing in Brazil's discussion is that it might be problematic only for very small firms because keeping in mind, this is less complex entities, the client, not the firm. But the concern will be on the very small firms that perhaps won't have these ERPs. And this is why throughout these years, the request for support material guidance and so on is so repeated and repeated again. So there is a space for that, and I remember hearing a discussion that, okay, maybe that's not the best solution, and certainly this was not something specific. But at the end of the day, between having something that not might be ideal or totally fit for purpose, or not having anything. And there were initiatives, then not speaking in Brazil, but in other countries, which were not well structured. And I don't mean the Nordic initiative, but there were countries that had developed initiatives in that sense. That would be concerning because those initiatives were too simplified and wouldn't keep not even a level of scalability or professionality. So in this aspect, having this global reference of standard, potentially, I believe this is the best reason to justify the development of the standard, instead of having something made anyhow without assuring any quality, because on less complex entities, it's not unusual that no concrete audit standard is applied. You won't find the risk assessment, you won't find the concrete definitions that are required. In this sense, this is a reference or a guideline or a basis for these cases. Of course, respected the definitions of less complex entities that need to apply. This is based on the discussions I have been accompanying through the years.
Thanks, Monica. I'm just wondering whether, I mean, they're not putting anyone on the spot, but Nicholas, given your role, whether you, from a regulatory point of view, any views? And then we come to Hilda.
Yes, we are looking at it positively. We made an announcement when it was issued, and we are looking at it positively to adopt for LCEs. One question I would like to ask is, if a listed company or a group of companies not listed acquires an LCE, what happens then? Do they have to, the group of companies is following the ISAs, and the acquired companies, the LCEs, so, is there a provision for that? Thank you.
Hilda?
Thank you. ISAs for LCEs, it was first a Nordic initiative, as Klaas said, and then it still has this European connotation around it. So overall, we're very happy the standard is finally there. We were also involved in this event that Jasper referred to try to promote it now that it is there. But it is ultimately a decision in each country that needs to be made, and there is an agreement needed between different parties. Within the European Union, it doesn't exactly help that our Committee of European Audit Oversight Bodies is not having a favorable view on the standard. You had this list with the challenges. I think these are the ones that resonate with them and that they have as well. So to have then, a lead from there, that's just not there. I don't know how IFIAR is looking at the ISA for LCEs and if they have a view on it. So the discussions are taking place in every single member state. I think in a lot of them it is being considered, and the pros and cons are being looked at, especially because at the end of 2023 there was we have audit exemption thresholds in the European Union, and at the end of last year there was a 25% indexation of those numerical thresholds. So that is why now this year in a lot of member states there are discussions on should we apply this indexation, how should we do this? We have then more entities that would not be within a mandatory audit. Should there be something else? So to have, and I heard you have national standard setters meeting, but to come back to those people, but also to others, to reinforce that this ISA for LCE, it's not just about small entities, but there can often be a link to reinforce that could be also part of the discussions on increasing audit exemption thresholds in Europe, I think would be a good thing to do. And the IAASB or IFAC or anybody who can play a role in this, I think would be good to do that, to continue to reach out in the first place to the public, to the to the professional accountancy organizations, but also to others, because the resources that you're developing around this to support are actually very good, we find. So I think the more promotion you do for them, the more chance there is that the standard will be part of the discussions and might eventually be adopted. Because for the moment, we're trying to keep track of the countries that are adopting. It's a very, very, very short list for the moment. So it's not going all by itself, I would say.
Jose?
Yes, I'm trying to answer the question number 2, taking into account my experience in the country where yesterday I told you about. And I know that the legislative body, they never make any law regarding accounting. They rely on some standards. For doing that, they also rely on local accounting groups, councils, associations, etc. Those groups are mainly directed by the Big Four, any country in Latin America. So my suggestion for further facilitate the adoption is to have a partnership with the Big Four. This is the way to go through the legislation bodies to adopt this new standard. But by the way, I think it's pretty good for Latin American enterprises, which are very small, and I think it's a very good idea.
Thanks. Do you want to come back to Nicholas's question, Jasper, or you, Isabel?
I can answer, sorry. Or Jasper, did you want to?
No, you go ahead, and then I'll add to what you're saying if needed.
Sorry. So the question was about the group of entities if they acquired an LCE. So there's nothing that will, in the standard itself, that will prohibit the audit, the statutory audit of that LCE to be performed with the LCE standard. Having said that, I don't know if the group auditor will impose the full suite of ISAs. It is the same opinion. It will be reasonable assurance. So there might be something to say there. The opposite, though, is not applicable. So if you're in a group audits that are all LCEs and you acquire a PI or a listed entity, then you're automatically out of the standard. So.
And maybe
I guess it's, yeah.
So maybe to answer also like a question from Doc about whether jurisdictions should adopt the standard or whether there's an expectation. I don't think there is a direct expectation. We set this standard for the world, and in certain instances, a jurisdiction it might not be applicable or not work for them. For example, Isabel mentioned about the size threshold. So for some jurisdictions, small entities don't need an audit. So in that case, there's a lesser need for this standard. And when there are very specific organizations that are or entities that need an audit, like for example the pension funds in Australia, that the standard was not developed for that. It was developed as a global solution. So I think for many jurisdictions it will add something, but for some not. And then on the threshold, I think the other thing it's important to highlight is that these thresholds that we set at the standard, they were done at the time of writing the standard. So when we were writing the standard, for example, the European Commission's definition of a small entity, that was still the old definition. But right now, of course, they have a new one. So we would expect if a jurisdiction would set a threshold that they would align with that new definition of the European Commission, if it was an entity in Europe, of course, or jurisdiction in Europe. So this is a little bit of clarification on that threshold question as well.
In terms of adoption, I want to build on something Jasper said. There's no requirement or expectation for adoption of this standard in a particular jurisdiction. a jurisdiction will not be viewed as in bad stand-in with the IAASB if they do not adopt it. We created this standard because we heard significant demand. And we also realized that ISAs themselves are reflecting sort of what I view as an increasing bifurcation in the world's economy, where there's a significant amount of complexity and there's a significant amount of expectations and demand upon a regulated set of companies, particularly those who have some public interest component or take public funds. So we tried to come up with a proportionate approach that was dealt with the specific circumstances of these entities. Now, it's up to each jurisdiction to determine whether this is useful today or tomorrow or in a few years' time. Now, it's not a perfect analogy, but I was very involved with IFRS for SMEs when it came out. In fact, as part of the constitutional process, we got it inserted in the Constitution to sort of encourage the IASB to act ultimately and produce IFRS for SMEs. We saw a very similar response to that standard in the early years, where some jurisdictions were enthusiastic. I'd put the Nordics like in that group as it was for our standard, as a certain group of countries were, for example, South Africa, who adopted the IFRS for SMEs standard even before it was finalized as an ED. So that makes them enthusiastic. There were a number of countries and jurisdictions that were interested, but we want to wait and see. And they're waiting to see how it will be implemented in other jurisdictions. And finally, there were another group of jurisdictions who said, this is not for me ever, no way, the world will collapse. I laugh because Doug talked about what Australia has taken a decision, which is in the right about not adopting ISA for LCE. But originally, Australia was not so enthusiastic for IFRS for SMEs. Lo and behold, I think Australia adopts IFRS for SMEs.
Just to clarify, half adopted it.
Yes.
The disclosure part.
Okay, well, you can half adopt ISA for LCEs later. But that's what I say. So like our expectations are to serve the marketplace. There are a number of jurisdictions that we know will be first movers on it. We will certainly encourage the use because we think it is a high quality standard for the nature and circumstances of the institutions that it was written for. And we will continue to monitor progress and support the standard as we go along. So I just wanted to set the expectations, but also provide that analogy that it doesn't trouble us that there's a smaller group of first movers in this space.
Thank you, Tom. Should we move on to the next piece, which is maintenance? Is that right? Okay.
And I will talk to the maintenance point. Michelle, can we go to the next slide? So the maintenance of the ISA for LCE has been a topic where our stakeholders had mixed views about. Generally, there were two camps. So one camp wanted to have consistency between the ISA for LCE and the ISAs. So generally, that group, they wanted to make changes to the ISA for LCE when an ISA was revised. So for example, if you revise ISA 240 on fraud, then they would also expect changes in the ISA for LCE. Then there was another camp that wanted a stable platform, as that would help the adoption of the standard. And they were of the view that the ISA for LCE is a separate standard that does not need to follow the change to the ISAs exactly. So in addressing this issue, we considered three possible way forwards with respect to the maintenance and the timing mainly of the maintenance. So the first option considered was aligning revisions to the ISA for LCE with revisions to the ISAs. So this is when an ISA is revised, the ISA for LCE would also be revised. Then the second option was to revise the ISA for LCE periodically, for example, every 3 years or every 5 years, and then pick up all relevant changes that have been made to the ISAs. And this is similar to how the IFRS for SME is updated. Then the third option was only to revise the ISO for LCE when needed. So this could be periodically, but it could also be after a major revision of an ISA. So in the end, the IAASB landed on the following. So we start with a period of stability for at least 3 years once the standard becomes effective. And we think this is appropriate to provide stakeholders with an initial period of stability. This would give them time to adopt and implement the standard before introducing new revisions. And then after that, the IAASB will consider the best way forward to maintain the ISO for LCE. However, the core consideration will be that the ISO for LCE must remain up to date and generally consistent with the ISAs. So with that, we can go to the third question on the maintenance for the ISO for LCE. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. I'm going to look, maybe Claes, given that you pioneered this, your views on this will be very important.
Thank you, Alan. Well, I don't know if I pioneered the project, but
your region did, the Nordics did.
But when I kind of view, I think that the IASB position of period of stability of at least 3 years is reasonable. I think it's a good balance, so to say. So I support that approach. I think it's important to roll out the standard and let it work for some time before you implement it. So I'm quite comfortable with that approach. I think it's a good one.
Any other views? Dwayne.
More, I guess I have a clarifying question. So would it be a 3-year period with no change, but then thereafter it's linked to changes in ISAs? Or is it once every 3 years you're doing an update, or just for clarification?
Thank you. So it would be indeed first 3 years of initial if there's no changes. So the effective date is December 15, 2025. So there wouldn't be any changes that would be effective before December 15, 2028. After that, we have to still decide what we are going to do. So we haven't made a final decision on that. We will discuss then at that time what would be best to do. So this time we haven't made a final decision on that yet.
Thank you. I've not spoken to my former colleagues at IFIAR in a while, so I'm not speaking for them at all. But I do know we had discussions when I was with IFIAR about one of the concerns that was raised on a prior slide is confusion about the level of assurance you're getting under ISAs versus ISAs for LCEs. And so it seemed to me that as a policy matter, you'd want to have as close a linkage as possible to when you change ISAs, if the change is relevant to LCE ISAs, that you make the corresponding change at the same time to avoid confusion, to avoid feeding into that perception that it's a lesser than or different type of assurance. So that's my gut reaction, but I realize, there's resource issues and all the rest that also play into those decisions. But I think just conceptually, it seems to avoid some of those concerns that have been raised by regulators and others, the more concurrently you can be making changes. If a change is important, it should be important for both if it's applicable, is my thought.
Very good. Thanks for that, Dwayne. Very pragmatic. Any other points? No. So we should move. That's it, is it? Or have you got anything else you'd like to cover?
No, that's it. I think we just had another slide that says other matter if anyone wants to raise anything else on the LCE, but there was no more presentation.
Okay, thanks. So any other thoughts from anyone? I mean, it sounds as if, well, it's now in flight, of course. Oh, Claes, sorry.
Coming to think about other matters that could have an impact on implementation of this or adoption of it is, of course, language. Of course, if pardon my total ignorance, if there's only an English-speaking version about this, but what I've learned during the years is you write standard in English and you assume that everybody can apply it globally. But language is of course an important matter here. So I think that's also part of it, is resources for that. But it does matter, I think. So just come to think about that.
No, you're right. That's a very good point, and it's one that we've struggled with for years. Willie?
Thank you, Alan. And maybe just on that, the previous question we asked about, any views or thoughts in terms of how we can continue to advocate for the standard, because obviously, clearly, we believe, as Thomas said, that this is a standard that can produce a high quality audit for the right type of entities that we've targeted. And part of that, and thank you, Hilda and Jose, you all had good suggestions in terms of what we can look at. But I just wanted to highlight, and that comes to Klaus's point, is that we will also continue to coordinate very closely with IFAC. I think IFAC plays a very important role through their contact with the professional accountancy organizations in terms of advocating for the standard. And that's also where the translations comes in. They are a good resource to us in terms of translating the standard into different languages. And Chris Arnold actually just shared last week with us some of the information on how they're tracking the adoption of the standard. And just at the very high level, I can indicate from what he shared with us, the region where there's the most interest at the moment in terms of countries moving ahead with some steps in terms of moving towards adoption is Europe. As Hilda has said, it's on an individual country by country basis, but that's certainly the region where there's the most interest, followed in by Asia, a lot of interest. And then sort of there's almost a tie for third place. It's between the Africa, Middle East region and South America. Those are the regions where there's the most interest in the adoption of the standard.
Thanks, Willie. So we're done. Tom, anything from your side? No? Okay, well, thank you very much. I mean, well done, because I know this has been a long, long journey. The discussion started even before you became chair. I remember Arnold was onto this many, many years ago. So you've got there, you've landed it. It's now landed, and you're going to get some uptake. And thank you for all of those who've supported the journey. It's not been easy. And it's taken quite a bit of your resources, given all the other things you've had to do. So well done to you and your board colleagues and your staff for getting there. Right, so surprisingly, we're 12 minutes early, which is good, which means we will have a full hour for lunch. And also I'm conscious that some people have to leave. So if you need to quickly go and pack your bags and things, I'm fine that we sort of take 1 hour and 12 minutes. So we're back on schedule at, what is it, 1:30? Yeah, if that's okay. Thank you. So we need Ken and Jeff, is that right? So have we lost Ken? Can you fly solo or do you need a co-pilot? Well, you've got all these passengers on your plane, so you better not crash. Right, so thank you very much. I hope you had a nice lunch. I must say the quality of the food has improved since I left the IFAC board. There must be something. You must have a lot of budget in these two standard setting boards. In my day, it was stale sandwiches. You never got a hot soup. So thank you very much for that. Right, so we're now on to the last session, extending the scope of the IAASB code, which is a topic very close to me, I have to say, particularly given that in my working life, I've often been, and I was saying this to Dwayne over lunch, that I've often found myself on teams where I was the only one that actually thought about an ethics code and had to comply with it. And that always troubled me. So I'm really interested to this conversation and to getting lots and lots of views from around the table. And I'm sure we will continue talking about this for quite some time beyond today. So over to you, Jeff and Ken.
Thank you, Alan, and welcome back, everyone. So this is our last main session, of course. So we look forward to a lot more discussion over the course of the next hour or so. But before we do that, of course, our topic is extending the impact of the IAASB code, as Alan has mentioned. And so before we get into the discussion, we just want to give you a quick overview of this particular strategic focus or area of focus for IAASB in the coming 4 years. As Gabriela had mentioned yesterday, there's one of the two key strategic areas of focus that the IAASB has identified as new strategic areas of focus, in addition to sustainability, of course. So in the morning, we had a great discussion on firm culture and governance, which was the other strategic area of focus. So this next session, we're going to be speaking to you and hearing your thoughts and views on this new strategic area of focus, which is extending the impact, rather explore the opportunity to extend the impact of the IAASB code. So I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of how this new strategic area of focus came along. And then we will go straight into the discussion and the questions. Certainly from the IAASB's perspective, in terms of the rationale of identifying this as a strategic focus area, recognize that even as you read the IAASB vision for this new strategy period, it's about recognizing and promoting the importance of ethics, in promoting public trust and confidence in businesses and organizations. And as Alan has alluded to just now, often in a PAIB or in an organization environment, you may have those who are PAIBs who are subject to the IAASB code, particularly Part 1 and Part 2 of the code. And then you have those who are not. And it does feel like a strange situation why you have, those, say, in the finance function, a few who are members of IFAC member bodies, they're PAIBs, and they're subject to a fairly robust set of ethics standards, and others are not, and you're doing the same work. And we certainly recognize that, for instance, when we went to Japan last year, when we were speaking to different stakeholders, but including those who are working in organizations, big companies, and they're in the finance office, and maybe the CFOs, or at least in the finance office, they do recognize that many of them are not PIBs, so they're not subject to the IAASB code. But they do recognize that it is important, being the first line of defense, being preparers, of financial and non-financial information to be subject to high, set of standards on ethical behavior. So the board certainly recognized that there shouldn't be any difference. If you are in those roles, you should be subject to high ethics standards. And the board agree that the board's view is that it's very much in the public interest that all preparers of financial and non-financial information to abide by the same high standards in terms of ethical behavior or ethical conduct. And individuals who are performing the same services as professional accountants should be subject to the same high ethics standards. And that's why the board felt that it is important for this next strategy period to agree to explore that opportunity to extend the impact of the code. Now, of course, the board has already started working on this as part of its sustainability project, because our sustainability project and our standards on our IAASB is profession agnostic. It's not just for professional accountants, but it is for everyone who's providing sustainability assurance engagements, whether you are a professional accountant or not. So we have already started that thinking. We have already started actioning some of these standards and making sure that it's covering not just the accounting profession, not just accountants or professional accountants, but for anyone who's providing a particular type of services, because we see that there is public interest that all these practitioners who are doing the same service is subject to the same high ethics standards. And so that gets me to a little bit of the approach. Of course, it's a phased approach. And as I mentioned, we have started with sustainability already. And it's not something that we will move quickly and come to a conclusion quickly, because it does involve a fair amount of stakeholder engagement. As you would appreciate, and some of you have already mentioned yesterday and throughout the course of the last few sessions, that one key element is enforcement and monitoring. Who's going to do that, for instance? So there's a lot of questions that we need to ask. There's a lot of areas that we need to explore, and there's a lot of stakeholders we need to talk to. And so the board felt that we need to take a phased approach. And so starting with sustainability, and our aim, of course, with our sustainability project is that the board hopefully will approve the final standards in December this year, which allows the board to then move to some 2 new work streams under this strategic area of focus. The clicker finally working on the last session, so that's good to know. Okay, so we have 2 new work streams. The first one, I'll just be very brief, because that's not what we're asking for comments today, not your views on specific details of these work streams, because we haven't started them yet. But I will just give you a quick overview. The first one is exploring extending the impact of code to all preparers of sustainability information. Of course, we have already started with the sustainability project, and it makes sense that we perhaps then move to preparers of sustainability information as the next phase. As we look at that, we will of course look at any existing regimes that is already covering some of those areas, and we will look at how our code and IAASB can come in and fill any gaps, I guess. But we also have another work stream that we are planning to commence in 2025, which is on the role of CFOs and senior PAIBs. And we recognize that the role of CFOs particularly have evolved quite a bit over the last few years. Particularly, they probably have more involvement with sustainability information as well. This particular work stream, the role of CFOs and senior PIBs, is more focused on professional accountants. But I guess as we start to do information gathering and work on this other work stream, we will probably come across information that will be helpful for this new work stream on exploring extending the impact of the code to all preparers of sustainability information as well. The other work stream under this broad strategic focus is on developing independent standards for sustainability assurance engagements not within the scope of Part 5 of the code. You've heard from our team yesterday when we were going through with you the sustainability work stream and project, that not all sustainability assurance engagements, the independence components, it doesn't cover all sustainability assurance engagements. So those fell outside the scope of Part 5 for independent standards. Part 4B kicks in, but of course it's only for professional accountants at this stage. We haven't changed the language. So this is something that the board will look at in 2025 as well. And so again, these two work streams, we still got another year to go before we would start these work streams, or at least that's our plan. But of course, as we move along with our sustainability project, we will get some feedback that no doubt will be helpful to these two work streams. But we're also getting some early information and early feedback and I guess discussion, particularly with yourselves. And so, we certainly welcome any feedback and comments, and we'll have some questions in just a minute that we'll walk through with you, and then we'll open the floor for your comments. But before I do that, I want to give Gabriella and Ken the opportunity to share any additional thoughts before we move into the questions. So, Gabriella.
Well, I'll be happy to do it, although I'm afraid that I'll have to control myself not to spend too much of your time with all the ideas and thoughts that this topic brings to my mind. First thing, I must say that there is someone sitting on my right side who is a little bit, not to say very much, responsible for the thoughts that we have developed in this respect. And this was based on some conversations, I think 2 years ago, about many things, but about the experience of someone who is a CFO and is an accountant, and had the experience of working with others doing similar things at the same boards, etc., and not being able or not being subject to the same rules or the same standards or the same ethical framework. And that experience must be, I must say, very this sets a lot of thoughts and possibilities that we are exploring here. So the second thing that I'd like to say is that this is a subject that we have been discussing for the last 2 years very intensively at the board and at the staff. Laurie is here with me. She's a board member, the staff, and etc. They may confirm that this has been one of the most important topics that we have been discussing. Not consensual from the start in terms of how the board members and even at the staff level approached the topic, but that managed to progress in a very good way and made us make that decision to develop profession agnostic standards for sustainability assurance for the simple reason that we focus on the public interest, on the interest of investors, of the users of the information, and it was very clear that for sustainability assurance, at least, the investor should be equally protected irrespective of who is providing the service. And this is the idea behind these profession agnostic standards. If there are different professionals providing the same service, the investor must be equally protected irrespective of who is providing the service. And this is only achievable if we have a common framework for all of them that we provide, and then the regulators make their decisions about if they want to use it or not, or if they want to allow or not. This is not for the IASBA. But very quickly, we came to the conclusion, like Jeff mentioned, that this could be equally applicable to other areas, other services, other parts of the code, namely on sustainability reporting. And there, I'd like to make an additional clarification, which is the following. We did consider the possibility of developing sustainability reporting standards in a profession agnostic way. At this stage, we haven't done it for the simple reason that we concluded that this is a very different question, problem, and issue compared to the sustainability assurance. There we have different independent providers, accountants, non-accountants providing the service. With respect to sustainability reporting, it's a more complex question, even if it doesn't appear to be at first sight, because what we are speaking about is that we have people inside an organization subject to the same direction, to the same strategy, to the same management approach, CFO, etc., Some of them are accountants, some of them are not accountants, doing exactly the same thing inside the same organization. Some of them are subject to the ethics standards, some of them are not. And the question is again, does it make sense for the users of this information that investors or other users are depend on the qualification of the preparer for the quality of the information that they get. But this is where I want to get to, this brings a lot of other considerations, because it's not only for the IASBA to develop profession agnostic standards, we can do it, but it's not enough. It takes the regulators and the corporate governance community to decide if they think that this is a good idea to have a framework applying to all of them equally and take action in that direction. So this is why Jeff rightly said that this takes a lot of outreach, conversations, interactions with stakeholders, and very in particular with companies, corporate governance community, and regulators, because this will only be useful and effective if the rest of the community and of the system has the conviction that this is a good move and a step that we really do together with the others and not alone. So this explains a little bit why we decided to delay this project and to explore a little bit further if it will be acceptable and usable, depending on the decisions which are to be made by others than only the IASBA alone. I'll stop here.
Thank you. Gabriela, Ken?
Thank you very much, Jeff and Gabriela. I'll just share a few thoughts just for introduction and for context. We have a few questions really just to trigger a bit of discussion, but I would suggest we will not be bound necessarily by the questions that Jeff will outline in a moment. But I just thought I'd share some additional thoughts to what Gabriela has basically relayed earlier. Maybe it's more an anecdote. Some years ago, the predecessor to Gabriela, the former IASBA chair, Stavros Somadakis, and I paid a visit to the UK Financial Conduct Authority. We met with the chair of the FCA then, and our discussion basically was a free-flowing one, and it came around to basically this topic about the ethics obligations, the ethical obligations on accountants in business, CFOs, for example, in particular, or those operating in the financial reporting departments within companies, issuers in particular. And basically, the observation was made, as Gabriela mentioned earlier, that accountants are subject to a very rigorous code of ethics. They have obligations under the code in terms of their conduct. But there are others who operate in the same roles as professional accountants, CFOs in particular, who are not subject to the same requirements. There are MBAs, for example, who are not accountants, who many MBAs, in fact, the CFO community is replete with MBAs, but there are also other professions. Engineers, they are relatively common. You know, we've come across engineers who are CFOs. So there are people of different backgrounds who operate in the same role as professional accountants. And the observation that the chair of the FCA then said is essentially that he saw it as a market flaw. So the way I am seeing this work stream, and if it's going to end up in a project, a standard setting project, then it is what's going to be. But the way I see it is that it is a work stream that's addressing an issue of market mechanics, and it connects to market structure as well. But to my mind, it's an issue that deals with the mechanics of the financial markets in terms of who actually operates in the markets and what are the obligations that attach to them and that apply to them. And that takes me to another observation, which is that in some jurisdictions, we know that there are voluntary corporate governance codes. You know, in the UK, for example, we know that there's a corporate governance code that's not legally required by companies to adopt, but it is a code that companies are expected to follow, and other jurisdictions has taken the lead. I think Japan is another jurisdiction has following a spate of accounting scandals. Japan has moved in that direction. So there are a number of jurisdictions that have a voluntary body of sort of codes of conduct, as if you will, but in the area of governance. And then that takes me to this idea as to why companies would even bother thinking about a code of ethics that would apply to people who work within their midst, who are not accountants. Why would they bother even considering having a code of ethics applying to individuals who are not accountants? And then I recall some discussions I've had with stakeholders as we've been meeting them, and some people have observed a potential benefit to companies if they were able to demonstrate to the markets that the people who work within their midst actually adhere to a very robust, very rigorous code of ethics. And that in and of itself could act as a signaling mechanism in terms of the trust that investors can have in them. And that potentially even could go as far as to lower the cost of capital. And we took that sort of observation to a meeting we just had a couple of weeks ago in Tokyo with a group of investors, Gabriel and I, and that resonated with them. You know, this is a group of investors who clearly understand the operations of the capital markets, and they saw clearly the benefit for companies that if they could have a better signaling mechanism, that could be very useful for stakeholders and potentially, as they say, lower the cost of capital for the companies themselves. And that takes me to another observation, which is that, again, from another conversation we've had with stakeholders, that the business lobby is very powerful. And in some jurisdictions, whenever there have been attempts at regulating business has pushed back very hard. And one observation that's been made to us is that some years ago in Germany, there were attempts at requiring companies to have audit committees, but there was a big pushback. Now, I don't know where things are now, but that's kind of what we heard. And that's basically tells us that it's going to be very difficult for there to be a global regulation mandating a code of ethics that would apply to all individuals who work within companies. So we know that's going to be very challenging. So that's again, this is telling us this is, you know, in the box of very difficult challenges, very difficult issues. But we have some potential avenues to navigate, if you will, as we explore what might be achievable. And finally, I come to this issue as to, again, what would be the benefit of companies to even consider a code of ethics that would apply very broadly across their different departments. And just recently, again, through another conversation we've had with stakeholders, one suggestion was, well, yes, it's going to be very beneficial to companies, but yes, you could make it very simple. In fact, you wouldn't even need a regulation, an instrument of regulation to come in, because what you could do, you as IAASB-IESBA, is to develop a code of ethics that would be neutral in the sense of being agnostic as to whom it would apply, and make it available for any companies to choose to adopt. But for that to happen, you have to tell the story. You have to tell the narrative as to why this code of ethics would make a difference. What would be different from what companies already have today in terms of a code of conduct? Because if we were to look across the markets, pretty much every company has a code of conduct. It might sit on one page, it might sit on 2 pages, but basically it's a set of principles. And then we have the code of ethics developed by IAASB that applies to professional accountants in business. So what is the difference? What difference would the code of ethics developed by this board make for companies at large. So a number of thoughts there that's kind of a swirling around, and we know that there's a very big public interest issue here. It is an issue of market mechanics, as I see it, as I mentioned earlier. And we're trying to figure out what's the best way to go forward in a way that would advance the public interest on this issue. So I'll pause here and we can open the discussion, Jeff. But you have a bunch of questions, I know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Gabriella. So I'm just going to walk through. We have 5 questions for you, more just to get your thoughts going, and you've received these a couple of weeks ago. And we're not going to do one question at a time, of course. And as Ken has mentioned, don't be restricted by just these 5 questions. If you have any other additional thoughts or feedback, we'll welcome those. So let me just quickly walk through these 5 questions with you. The first one is about how you see the sustainability reporting landscape will evolve in the next few years, and how this might affect those who are involved on the reporting side within companies. The next question would be, do you agree that all preparers of financial and non-financial information, whether they're professional accountants or not, should be subject to the same high ethics standards? Next one is a little bit more on the outreach side, and how, whether you have any specific thoughts or input on how we can effectively engage our different stakeholders outside the accountancy profession to look at how we can pursue this strategic objective. The next 2 questions is, first one is a bit more of a catch-all, I guess, is key considerations IASB should take into account when commencing the work, this work stream on exploring the extending impact of the code to all preparers of sustainability information. And the last one is to Ken's last point. It's about how, without any sort of specific regulatory requirements, which Ken has mentioned, it can be quite hard, how much companies be guided to voluntarily adopt the IASB code, and what might be, I guess, the challenges and hurdles, and how might they be overcome. So these are 5 general questions that we have. I'm going to pass it to Alan, but we're happy to take any thoughts or feedback on any of those questions or any other matters relating to this strategic area of focus. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Ken. So let's, I'm sure we're going to get a lot of 10 cards up. Right. Bello.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think this is a very important topic and agenda, for discussion. But my comment is not really on the specific questions that is being raised. It's more on the strategic mandate of IASB. I think we will be having more of these topics and areas whereby there is no need for segregation between professional accountants and other practitioners. So I think my strategic thoughts is that there is a need for rebranding, perhaps at a very senior levels, to rebrand the IASB, maybe instead of for accountants to be for practitioners. So I think this, because the current mission of IASB does not prohibit, even the mandate does not prohibit, it just limited its scope only to professional accountants. But I don't know, when you look at the mission and then you look at the brand, you will see that there is a restriction in terms of the branding. So there is possibly, I will suggest that there may be a need to look at how a discussion at a very high level, at the board level, to see how IASB can be rebranded instead of for accountants, and then should be for practitioners. And I think that will solve this issue of bringing issues, whether this is for accountants, these are non-accountant. It will give you the flexibility to fly higher and also expand your scoping. So I think this is just this is my comment, and I totally agree with the proposal that has been. All the points that has been raised are really fundamental and important, and to be able to cover. You don't need to segregate. The code should be extended to all the practitioners, not only for accountants. So I think this is just my comment. And I would like to use this opportunity as I take already a permission from the chairman to excuse myself, I will be having a meeting with the Federal Reserve in a short while now. So that's why I thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Bella, and thank you very much for coming. I know you've got another commitment, so please leave when you need to. Don't be embarrassed by that. And hope you have a good meeting with the Federal Reserve. Please keep the interest rates low because it affects the world economy, not just the US economy. And look forward to seeing you in the next meeting. Thank you. Natasha.
Great, thank you. Really fabulous presentations and initiative here. I also think this needs to be applied across, the piece. In terms of your specific question on how to reach out to certain stakeholder communities, I had a couple of ideas, or maybe 3 or 4 ideas, specifically on 2 communities. One are the audit committee communities to reinforce the code, and then the investor community to reinforce the code. And things, and you mentioned, and actually, so I'm responding to the prompt that you provided. I thought that was really, really interesting. Things like for audit committees, thinking about how corporate governance codes could start to embed expectations around audit committees, requiring that their auditors apply the code, for example, as an expectation. When you look then at investors, I think there are 3 levers that you might have. One is stewardship codes, how the code could be incorporated into stewardship codes from the perspective of, investor responsibilities to hold auditors and audit committees to account. And one of the things that could be then suggested there is investors setting an expectation for the code to be applied by their auditors, for example, as well as their audit committees. So that would reinforce the first. Another is to engage with voluntary investor initiatives like ICGN, which you may be doing, to get that as part of those position papers that investors put out on their expectations around corporate governance and audit and accounting. I'd be very happy to create that link if you don't have it. And then proxy agency outreach. So the proxy agencies are very influential on how investors are voting on audit committees and audit. And if you were to talk to them, like ISS, Glass Lewis, et cetera, who are, the most powerful, around, whether they would use this as a KPI in their assessment of auditor reappointment or audit committee direct reappointments, I think that could be another interesting lever for you. I'm sure there are lots of others, but I do think if you want to get this into the ecosystem, getting investors and audit committees to require it or to expect it would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. To be slightly, maybe a little provocative here, and hopefully, Ken, I didn't misunderstand what you were saying, and if I did, please jump in here. But on the second point about accountants and non-accountants being subject to the same high ethical standards, I wonder how much of this is sort of optics and maybe form over substance in some ways, because I would argue, and maybe this is a US-centric comment here for listed companies, I would argue that they are, and you referred to CFOs in some situations that are not accountants, but they're CFOs, and I could speak from personal experience. I'm not an accountant, auditor, but I've managed large controller organizations with a bunch of accountants. But at the end of the day, every quarter, as part of Sarbanes-Oxley in the US, I, along with the CEO, had to sign on the line and attest that these financial records were obviously consistent with generally accepted accounting principles. And I had to attest by punishment of blah, 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 that the financial integrity was sound. And again, I do acknowledge that that could be US-centric here, but there is a mechanism where you could argue by default, you are adhering to those same ethical standards. I would hope, at least I took it that way. So.
Yeah, my point is pretty much related to what Natasha mentioned. I used to be for 15 years CFO, and I'm an engineer, so I had a CPA, but it's not updated. But I think that it would be a good idea to first focus on regulated, companies to really, instead of the CFO, when it has to focus on audit committees. Okay, and you mentioned, US. I remember when I applied to get my CPA here as an engineer, I applied to New Hampshire because it was, a state that I could apply. So imagine. Yeah, I went there. But so by saying that, I think that we need to be focused on to make sure that we have, all the financial statements, they should be signed by CPAs with updated license. And so if we, start with the institutions that really certify the CPAs to make sure that, they understand the ethical rules or standards, and I think this will help, help quite a bit. The other thing is, going back to her point, stewardship, right? We need to make sure that we convey or go to the main investors, BlackRock, and to make sure that they understand their role in to have accurate financial statements. And so I think that this will be really helpful. I was talking with Bello about the Islamic investors, and so I think that when we look at different types of investors, even the big, the sovereign funds and so on, normally they have totally different profile standards, and I think that would be helpful also to convey our message to the big ones, to show how important it is at the end of the day to to have firms that follow minimal code, whatever they are. I think that this would be a good way to make sure that we convey the message to, because if you think about, just brainstorming a little bit, we have big investors in the globe that so we need to follow the money, in a sense that go to those big investors that they now have this ESG agenda. But when you talk with them, you realize that it's checking the box sometimes. So if we go and convey the message that how important for them to really understand the sustainability report and so on, because most of them, at the end of the day, we have junior analysts checking the box. That's it. When we look and when we talk with international investors.
Thank you very much. Chikato, please.
I also like to talk mostly about number 2 and number 4. First, about the number 2 with regard to financial and non-financial information, and then basically people who do the assurance, whether it's a professional accountant or not. I'm a big proponent of applying ethics to both sides, both financial information and the non-financial information. But then, to make it really the same level of ethical standard? I don't think so. And then one of the reasons is that the non-financial information, the implication of the non-financial information, especially to the investors or to the corporate values, I think it's still very immature. You know, between the financial information and the corporate value, it's a straight line. And then we know the kind of attribution to the corporate value, but then where the nature of the sustainability information, it's still lots of narratives and qualitative information as opposed to quantitative. And then we know there is a kind of correlation between sustainable information and the corporate value, but then attribution is very, very, very weak. I think it's for that reason, I feel really having the same rigorous ethical standard to the professionals, whether it's an accountant or not, applying the similar level of high level, really detailed, ethical code would be premature for that reason. And then also professionals who are not accountant, who would work on assurance for sustainability information would be mostly coming from consulting firms and firms which would provide certificate and so on. They don't have a similar background as the accounting professionals. I think it's more like accounting professionals are more accustomed to code of conduct, ethics, and so on, and then the other professionals no. And so I think it could be also so that's really like people's background, where they're really coming from, need to be considered. And then number 4 is basically, are we going to apply the same ethics to preparers? For instance, like where I am, which is a financial sector, there are lots of people like myself, who have 2 backgrounds, coming from the risk management, financial management, and then working on the sustainability. But then outside of the financial sector, when you go to the industries and the service industries, people who are working on like information disclosure of the sustainability information, their background are very different. They're coming from a CSR or the PR, environmental protections, and so on. So again, they coming from their background and experiences, that they are not really familiar with this kind of very rigorous code, behavior, code of conduct, and then ethics. So I think we need a more like kind of a gradual introduction. I think that we need it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to add one thing to her, and when we look at financial, institution, think about fintech and insurtech. So fintech and insurtech. So they don't have the same standards, the same ethic. So even within the same industry, we have some companies that don't follow the basic rule, the basic code.
Doug?
Probably some similar things. I agree. In public interest, it's the right way to go. It's very challenging, but that shouldn't stop you from pursuing it. I guess in terms of that question that's mainly been dealt with here, how to do it, and I don't have all the answers, but part of it is there are already professions who have bodies with some sort of frameworks, accreditation, or whatever. The problem is they're probably not international, a lot of them national, but thinking about influencing them, obviously the ISOs question themselves. There are also bodies like in Australia and New Zealand, April at the back, she knows about this, there's a Responsible Investment Association of Australasia. Now, it's not about sustainable reports or financial reports, but they're looking about some sort of assurance around reports on things like well, not exactly green bonds, but product disclosures and so forth. And it's a voluntary process where entities, financial institutions and so forth actually fund the body and then get accredited. So whether there's a way to work with those sorts of bodies, an obvious one is, it's something we commented on ISSA, 5000 exposure draft, is the extent to which when an auditor is, say, using an expert, and it's a significant part of the work, should they be thinking about, do those experts, follow quality management standards, at least as demanding a code of ethics? So it sort of fragments of things, but part of it does come back to the national side. And it's a question about, at the moment, we impose a code somewhat through legislation, but also through the accounting bodies. And so how at the national level you think about, should there be legislative change to support some of this? Are there bodies you can talk to? I sort of covered that. And that does go to the cost of regulation enforcement, because part of it is, it's great if people are saying they follow the code, but are they actually following the code? And this comes to another challenge, not a reason not to do it, apart from what is assurance. When you're talking about things like credit ratings and so forth, where's the dividing line? What's a green bond? The question about what functions is a code going to actually apply to? So how do you define what is a CFO? What is a consultant? Is a GP a consultant? So what's an internal auditor? They're not getting into that one, but financial advisor. So how you get to something, I'm not saying it's a reason not to do it, but you have to actually find a way to define the functions. Yeah, so a few fragments there. I think it's a good idea, but yes, very challenging.
Thanks, Doug. Well, this standard setting board doesn't shy away from challenges. Javier?
Okay, thank you, Alan. I have a few points here, if can go in order with that. I think the first point is regarding you mentioned about the IASBA strategy. I don't know if this is at this point, and given the resources and the time, it is a very ambitious project. And I don't know if this is the time, and I don't know, I'm not the one still with enough knowledge to judge that, to start such an ambitious project at this point. I think there are other projects on the table that maybe can be advanced more. But again, this is maybe what is the time frame we are putting on that one. That's a strategic standpoint. Secondly, as an investor, purely as an investor, and the two jurisdictions I know, Spain and a little bit the US, and somewhat the US as well. In Spain, you want to invest for your own, like here, you make your own decision, you don't have any problem. You're wrong, you're wrong. If you invest for third parties, really probably what you mean by investor, meaning institutional investor or mutual funds, then you have to sign certain things that the other person, the third parties, they know, why you may invest, what you may suggest, what you may do. So to a large extent, there is some kind of ethics and code of conduct that you have to follow there. And on top of that, here is very similar. On top of that, you have FINRA here that regulates a lot of things. So that's another point to make. And the last but not the least is that one that you're mentioning about the consideration regarding sustainability. I don't see the difference it will be eventually, you're asking on the medium term, between corporate reporting sustainability and reporting financial reporting. I think, as I said, I expressed already my feelings, it's going to be one eventually, and I think it should be all across the board. And it start to separate a lot of things here. I think eventually it's going to be a matter of convergence. So I think at that point it might be good, looking more on a more broader approach than just only that. So I think that will be my third considerations on that sense.
Thanks, Jose. Sorry, Javier. Jose? Too much Spanish. JJ.
Thank you. Please remember that I am a PA.
Yeah.
The first question, and I agree with Javier, there's going to be just one report. And I'm telling that because I was for many years a writer of our annual report and sustainability, and it's a nightmare to write two reports. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. The second question, I think that there's going to be an overlap risk here. Because as I mentioned, there are many different disciplines or kind of education to be a CFA or an investor. For example, you talk about CFO. And most of the CFO, at least what I know, they are chartered financial analysts, CFAs. I think somebody here is a CFA. And CFA have their own code of ethics that they have to comply with. So if you add, I am now an internal auditor, I have my own internal auditor code of ethics and blah, blah, blah. So in the ideal world, we should have one thing for everything, no? But not only in code of ethics, but reporting standards, even some laws, but the ideal world doesn't exist. So I think it's gonna be very hard for you to reach what you are looking for. I'm sorry.
Okay, no. Toshi, I heard this morning I could call you Toshi.
Thank you. Sorry for echo Jose's answer. But for me, also, the second question. I do not want to give a non-constructive feedback, but I must say my answer is no, absolutely. Every preparer has their own ethic code. They already should be subject to some kind of industry guideline or code. My understanding is that IASBA code is for PA and non-PA who provides sustainability assurance, but not for preparers. As a preparer's perspective, this extension could be too severe, too much administrative burden. If the impact of the code described in slide 4 and same high standards described in slide 5 mean IASBA code itself. Extending it to non-PA who provide sustainability assurance must be the solution. That's all. Thank you.
It's the last word, must be a solution. Thanks. Thank you very much. Yanni.
Thank you very much. I want to align with what Lowell said, the first speaker. There's really a need to expand the work of IASBA, but the issue I look at is that the name limits the scope. The issue and the best approach is to have a change in name. And if we just remove for accountants and get a broader name, it will be more appealing to have other professionals to comply with the code. The limiting factor is that it's for accountants, but the codes that are being published by IASBA is meant for almost all professionals. For instance, when nuclear was published, in my country, we argued that if all professionals will abide by that nuclear, things will be much safer and easier there. But the argument is, why would you force my own profession to abide by that meant for accountants? So I would suggest that while thinking about changing the name, we should adopt the strategy that brought IFRS Foundation to establishing International Sustainability Standard Board. There should be high level of international politics to get all within the ecosystem to support one single body to issue ethics. Because with the future of sustainability reporting, which we all have agreed that we're not going to have in the nearest future, we're not going to have separate reports, but corporate reports. Therefore, all professionals involved in the preparation of that corporate report should have a particular code of ethics to comply. And if we reason in that form, I think it will make it much easier. You know, before the sustainability, before the IAASB, we have plethora of sustainability reporting framework, but the support gotten by IFRS Foundation, given by ISCO, G8, and all of them made it quite easier for them to stamp their feet on that. So I would suggest that we adopt some strategy in order to ensure that we reduce the differences or the non-compliance issue. Then on the specific question number 4, I again suggest that if there is a multi or a cross-functional work stream that will bring in some other professionals into that, it will give a faster way of buy-in by other professionals and make it more acceptable to all. On your question on CFO, along with Steve, in my country, CFOs must sign the financials, and they cannot sign if they don't register with the regulator. And no CFO in Nigeria that is not a professional accountant is allowed to append signature on financial statement, because it is expected that you ought to understand the process and what you're appending your signature to. So I don't see a problem in getting CFO to complying with the codes issued by here. That's my contribution.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. A couple of different observations. I think that the overall view from me is that if there is a strong call from investors that they need something, there's something missing in the system, I totally accept that, and that must be filled in one or another way. So that's a given. So looking ahead, if you would come to a conclusion that you need to change the code in the future to bring it out, that's totally fine, because if you can bring it to the market and see if the market needs it and if the market adopts it, that's completely fine. However, when I looked at this project, and I have some thoughts about that. Is that, first of all, I was thinking about what is the core objective of this, because this discussion starts with saying, well, there's an uneven playing field. Say, as you say, Alan, if you've been there working as I've been saying that I have ethical standards now just close to me don't, and I totally accept that. And this differences in different jurisdictions, because if there are papers or not present there, I totally accept that. However, when then you move into saying that, well, the focus here is on sustainability reporting, and then it comes the question, why sustainability reporting? Why is that such an issue compared to all other issues that are inherent within the firm? So that's not quite clear to me. So those might be two different objectives you're trying to solve at the same time. And my third observation on that is that, aren't you really intruding into the field of corporate governance here? So that's my feeling, that saying that it's not explicit, it's not, but it seems to me that it's inherent. And is this way of trying to also to compensate for some kind of lack of corporate governance that you can observe in certain jurisdictions or maybe globally? Okay, that's fine. But if you're going to enter into that field, broadening the scope of what IASBA is doing, you might feel pressure, or you say that you will encounter competition in that sense, because other actors are also into this, as well as in corporate governance system. For example, if you think about this as a governance issue, then you, for example, the OECD or the World Bank might also be a player in that might have also an interest into this. So my overall conclusion, it's fine to continue exploring the project, absolutely. But I do have some thoughts in the end where you end up if you can provide, so to say, a piece that is missing from a corporate governance perspective. So if you can do it, then it's complete success. But that there might be some challenges on the way forward. So, thanks.
you very much, Gabriela.
I'm sorry, but I think that thank you very much for all the interventions, but concretely with respect to your last intervention, you're more than right. This is very much a corporate governance issue, and it's not our ambition to do what the others must do or may want to do. This is the start of a conversation, and maybe I wasn't clear at the start. The job for the IASBA is not that difficult as you are imagining, because our job would be, if considered necessary, that we develop these standards for sustainability reporting or financial reporting. We could see and think about the scope in a profession agnostic way, just like we did for the sustainability assurance standards. This should be our contribution, together with launching the discussion, being a platform for discussion, etc. But what we thought is that because this is mostly a corporate governance issue, we need to understand first if the corporate governance community, responsibles, investors, regulators, etc., are or are not interested in moving in that direction. And if so, that's the case, then we would provide our piece, and the others would provide the rest, the regulations, the approach, the OECD recommendations, whatever it's necessary, because it's not the IASBA who will all alone solve the problem. And that's what stopped us from doing it now, because we have to have this broader understanding if this is something that other stakeholders, other groups think it's needed and necessary or not. So we are not, we don't have a magic wand. To your intervention, of course, that's exactly our thought. If there is a consistent and unique framework for reporting, in this case for sustainability reporting or for financial reporting, why not a correspondent global framework for the ethics that complements the reporting framework? Now stop here. Thank you.
Can I go to Nicole, please?
So thank you, Alan. One additional point I would like to make to the first question, so how the sustainability landscape evolves over the next years. What we already heard, that we may have one integrated report in the future. I would rather focus on the number of entities that is subject to sustainability reporting. And in the European Union, due to the staggered approach of the CSRD, we're currently having the large companies that are subject to the CSRD, but in the following years, also smaller companies will be subject to the CSRD, meaning those companies are having less sophisticated reporting systems, and still they have to report this sustainability information in what way ever, but that needs to be considered as well. And with regard to the last question, the fifth question, what in my opinion is key is that the companies are having an incentive to voluntarily adopt the code. So they need to refer to the code that others also refer to the code, and they need it as some kind of basis for providing sustainability information. Maybe not a basis, but there needs to be this incentive. So I think the incentive is crucial here, and this might lead other companies following adopting the code. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Hilda?
Thank you. A few thoughts. And you know, normally we think about it, if you perform the same service or you do the same job, then you would expect you fall under the same requirements or rules or principles. So I think here that would mean that, well, if there are some professional accountants, they apply the code and they are into sustainability reporting, why then would their peers that are not professional accountants not fall under that? And I think it's very fair to consider that maybe there should be a level playing field. So that's at least how we often look at things. And I relate to Klaas' comment that now sustainability, it's the big thing. In a few years, maybe in 5 years, it will be something else. Maybe it's going to be on technology, and there will be lots more that is done around this. And then should we have the same discussion then again? And so is it topic specific, or is it and can you look at it in another way? I'm not sure I have the response, but I think it would be worth to think about it or to look at that. And when you look at the code, it's growing, and although length should not be a determining factor, I think it can be seen as overwhelming. And is the approach, is it to have principles and to really have the main things there, and to have the focus on that, or is it going to be something that is seen as too hard, too detailed, that would not be inviting also for other professionals to look into this? I think it's something that you should reflect on as well. And then finally, something completely different, and I'm sure it's not for ISBA, but if you look at it, it's actually quite funny that the focus so much has been until now on professional accountants and not on other professionals, because why would they not be also in associations or organizations? And maybe it's something for IFAC to really look at and say, okay, are we only an organization that should look at professional accounts, or should we look at other professionals that incorporate into an association, and should we then work with them as well? Because it's very different from one country to another. If we look at the UK, the chartered accountant is extremely broad, and they are in all walks of life. You have chartered accountants that are active. Accountants Europe, we have 50 member bodies. Of those 50 member bodies, together there are 1 million members. A third of them are in the UK, because the profession is so broad, and in other countries it's a very specific, narrow, focused profession, so to say. So why is that, and is that something that should be looked at, or maybe changed, or done something about it? It's always a question that I have if I compare the different member bodies that we have, and how different their remit or their reach is. And it's linked to whoever as a professional is into something like an ISBA code of ethics.
Thanks, Hilda. Can I just say, with your permission, we'll leave the 30-minute break, because we're already 8 minutes into that anyway. You may not have noticed that, but you've had 80 minutes of your break already. Would it be okay if we could go on? There's still quite a few people like to speak, and that will allow us to get to the end, and then before we go into a private session, we'll take a 5-10 minute break just to refresh, if that's okay. Thank you. Nicholas, you did have your tent cut up at one stage. Thank you.
Yes, I believe that all preparers should be on the same level playing field. And the one important thing is independence. One of the most important things is independence. Like we have the auditors and we say non-audit fees. What about non-sustainable fees, or whatever other fees these preparers are giving if they are engineers or something else? So there should be some field that is some minimum requirements, at least, because some might have their own codes, whatever, but there should be some minimum requirements that they should abide to. And as mentioned before, I think for listed companies that are having these preparers sign off, they should request them to abide to some the audit committee. They should request the preparers to abide to some code or something. In Europe, it's much easier because we don't have that option now, because we have requested an increase only for auditors, not for other preparers, for sustainability, other service providers. But even if you do have service providers, the law provides, the CSRD, that we have to impose the same requirements as auditors to these auditors. So the European Union has in place laws in a sense, okay, but we're not opted for that option in Greece. But I think the European Union has done some work on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicholas. Dwayne?
Yeah, this topic is it's really interesting and mind-blowing, I was going to say, but I mean, it could be so big, and I think scoping is really important. And I think the language around how you're describing what you're really targeting and I know right now you're trying to be blue sky and think about this in a very big way, but others have said it that at first blush, it seems so overwhelming that it almost like, well, it's just it's not possible. So I think how you decide, what practitioners are we talking about within a company? When I think about when I was chief accounting officer, and I have a U.S. centric view under SOX. I'm certifying to ICFR, or my CFO and CEO certified. I had to sign about our disclosure controls that covered more than just the financials, covered other parts of the 10K. And the 10K, by the way, I look at it as one report, and the SEC is going to require sustainability info in the 10K. So yeah, maybe we will be going to one report, but that's an aside. But there are so many people at the company that have some role in touching what ultimately ends up as a disclosure. And when you evaluate your system of internal control or financial reporting, you're touching all kinds of people throughout the company that have some role in providing information that support journal entries, that provide information that support disclosures, people on the customer people, all over the company, right? And most professions already have codes. I was just on the internet, marketing people, engineers, actuaries, most finance people. There are, professional organizations for almost every profession that is in a company that have their own codes already. Not everybody belongs to those associations in the company. So, I realize that. But I think as an example with SOX, what most companies I'm familiar with, you end up having internal certifications that people that had a primary role in creating information, you have them certify quarterly that they have evaluated information, that it's a fair presentation in all material respects, it's relevant, it's reliable, et cetera. And you roll that all the way up until it gets to the CEO. And that's the basis for the CEO to sign, one of the bases. I just wonder if we're trying to create something that is not going to be exciting. Anyway, all the challenges that people have pointed out, I don't need to re-point out, but I did want to offer the ICFR framework, which the CEO is not subject to IASBA's code of ethics, but the CEO is signing that this is a fair representation, and I've thought about it from an objective standpoint, and and in the internal control framework, you should have controls that protect against undue influence or bias or whatever it might be, or lack of completeness or omissions in disclosure. So another thing to think about is COSO, which many people evaluate their internal control frameworks in the US under SACs for US public companies. Under COSO was an industry thing that came together with the sponsoring organizations I looked at just now today, include the Institute of Internal Auditors, it includes FEI, Financial Executives Institute, AICPA, American Accounting Association, and they've changed their name, but it's a management accounting organization. So it's PAs that came together in the 80s. I don't remember, and Paul may, whether that was forced in response to some frauds at savings and loans and other things that were going on in the 80s, or the industry just came together because they were going to be forced. And the reason I bring that up is, are there others in the industry that IASBA should be partnering with to come up with what COSO was? Is simply different groups came together and said, this is what a good control environment would look like. And here's the criteria that you should have for a good control environment. Well, here's what a good ethical construct would look like. Here's elements of a good ethical construct. And if the goal of IASBA is just to be a thought leader in that regard and have something off the shelf that people could take and use, that's one thing. If the goal is to say we're going to somehow get regulators to impose this on an engineer or a marketing person or somebody answering phones at a customer service line who happens to provide information somehow into the financial reporting, you know, up the chain, that's a really ambitious objective. And I wonder, you know, I just really pause at, do you have sufficient time and resources to really commit to that? And I know, Gabriela, you're not answering that question yet. The whole point of this conversation is to get input to see if you're going to answer that question. But my gut reaction is this is a really high mountain to climb. And is this the highest and best use of your limited resources? When you look at what practically could come at the end of it, in terms of adoption, and what are the likelihood if that's really going to happen in a pervasive way. All that said, the underlying premise that in high quality reporting of whatever information, financial, non-financial, so many people touch it. That premise is right on. There are so many people in the ecosystem that touch it to create the information, but also that oversee the integrity of that information. But is that our role as IASBA to be imposing a code of ethics that many professions already have, and a control environment should have other protections in place to make sure that the data that's coming up is complete, is accurate, is not misleading, et cetera? And do you really need this on top of what should already be kind of nuts and bolts controls in the system? Thank you.
Thanks, Dwayne. Very thoughtful comments. Koichiro, please.
Thank you very much. So as Dwayne mentioned, this is a very big area. So that is why I think it's very important to have the like scoping and also steps to think about it. And I think basically two steps in the big picture. One is the sustainability assurance. That is the first step, because this is a professional agnostic standard, and already IASBA decided to include non-professional accountants into this IASBA course application. And this itself is very challenging because the non-professional accountants doesn't have the same background, and imposing them to use the IASBA code. And this is the first step, and make sure if it is moving well. That is the first step. And the second step is thinking about preparers application. And the preparers application has various aspects to think about. One is the affected stakeholders. Not only preparers, but also other people are affected. For example, those charged with governance will be affected because they have to monitor. And also regulators will be affected because chances are regulator has to do the regulation on them based on the IASBA code, if the IASBA code would be applicable to the preparers. So the engagement with different stakeholders, carefully listen to these people, that is important thing. And another aspect is making sure if the architecture of the IASBA is suitable for this mission. Because the architecture of the IASBA was originally designed to set the code for the professional accountants in practice and also professional accountants in business. And recently, expanding to the non-professional accountants providing the sustainability assurance. However, including the code for the preparer, chances are the architecture of the board, including the board composition or process, that kind of thing can be affected. Not sure, but the assessment may be needed. And also, in terms of the contents, I think the corporate governance code is a very good point. Chances are it might be a good idea to take a look at the similarity and the difference with the corporate governance code and the IAASB code. Chances are there are some similarity and some chances are there are differences, and chances are the differences can be opportunity to raise the bar for the reporting. In that case, chances are there might be opportunity, or chances are the difference might be because of the applicable entities are different. In that case, it might be important to carefully think about if this difference really mean anything for the preparers, something like that. So in total, I think this is a big thing, and thinking about the subset of the process, and I think that's important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Koichiro. David?
Thank you. I just want to add to what Nicholas said and draw some parallels with what Dwayne said. And I'm thinking in terms of scope. So with respect to public reporting, so annual financial statement, annual report comes out, hits your desk, and I'm an auditor by training and an economist background. As an auditor, I take the pages that are opined by a CPA as an auditor, and I say these are gold. And then I look at the MDA. Well, this is like okay, and because they read it, so I'll read this too. And the other stuff is might be true, might not be true, and non-GAAP measures garbage. And I'll layer things in terms of what's good to read and what I can trust and what I can't. Friends of mine who are also in the investment community think the whole thing's gold. The whole thing's solid. The non-GAAP measures, the annual letter from the president, the CEO, all that stuff is gold. And I'm like, not really, because there's a lot of garbage in there. The average reader thinks the whole thing is gold. It is submitted on an ethical basis. It is done with public disclosure intent, that it's appropriate, that it's fulsome, that it meets a certain standard. So if you look at setting the bar and the scope, which is where Dwayne's going, if it's everything, you're never going to get there. But if you limit it to everything that's in an annual report, everything if the marketing department threw a slide in there, a bunch of graphs and how big their market is and how fast they're going to grow, then it's got to be gold, because that will change your view of this company. How fast is it going to grow? What's the next step? If the other people, the CEO writes this annual letter, well, that should be gold. That should be true. That shouldn't be a bunch of bunk. And so I want to go down that path. There should be a standard of care followed by everybody who touches the annual report. If you didn't touch the annual report, okay. But if you touch the annual report, then there should be a set of standards for readers to feel comfortable with. Whether you're an auditor, whether your background is an engineer, whatever your background is, you should rely on the words that are in there and not rate them like I currently do, which is, just a little bit of my experience.
Thanks, David. Natasha.
It's okay. Thank you. Actually, having listened to all of the contributions, I wanted to clarify my earlier contribution, because when I said I think this should apply across the piece, I was actually thinking across the piece of assurance, audit and assurance, because I do think the way the code has been written seems to me has been very targeted to that particular activity. That's not to say I don't agree that it'd be great if we had effectively audit of the entire annual report and accounts and we could treat it as gold. But in terms of how it's written now, it seems to me that, yes, applying it to sustainability assurance plus the financial audit makes a lot of sense. And just also to respond to a point by Klaus earlier, Yeah, I agree, Gabriela, this is a governance issue. And I think for me, this is actually a mechanism for empowering the market. And by that, I mean both audit committees and shareholders to reinforce oversight of audit. So if this can be a tool for those constituencies, so to meet a market demand for the fact that we shareholders have a vote and audit committees kind of appoint, etc. They're doing all this, but maybe they don't always have all the tools to affect those roles and responsibilities. And if this could help them in doing that, that would be fabulous. I won't name names, but I would just give an example of a proxy advisor analysis for an auditor reappointment vote will be about that long, and they'll say nothing's come to light that would cause us to vote against. We need more detailed analysis, and that could be things like the auditor has signed up to this code and Thank you.
Isabel?
Thank you. I think it's really good to have this discussion and try and absorb or sponge or everything that exists to start and to determine whether something needs to be done. Obviously, as securities regulator, it's really important that everyone that touches the financial information or the sustainability information that's going to land in the market, and similar to what I said yesterday, so you'd hope that everybody has some form of ethics, and it's good to have some ethical standards around that. But I do agree, with the challenge that this might encroach on corporate governance, which is actually a really difficult topic, and I'm thinking specifically of the EU, where the landscape is very varied in terms of self-regulation codes, who enforces. Sometimes it's the securities regulators, sometimes not very clear. So there's a whole landscape that's extremely complex. But if we want to build an ecosystem where we get some clarity, I think that's where we need to start. So certainly support the initiative. Thank you.
Thanks. Nicholas, yeah, I'm going to come to James in it. Evangeline, is that new? Very quickly,
yeah,
please, and then I'd like to come to James. Thanks.
Gabriela, I believe, yes, it's corporate governance, and like in Europe, it has to be regulated. So if we have a financial statements and a sustainability report, this has to be regulated. So we had to decide in Greece if we're going to accept engineers to sign off as insurance providers. Okay, they have to apply to the same rules as auditors do. So they have to have training, they have to have rotations. Okay, what are they different compared to auditors? Okay, so this is implied in the CSRD. Okay, so we decided, yes, we only want auditors, and that we've given our proposals to the Minister of Finance to go to the Greek Parliament. But we saw all these problems. Okay, and they have to abide the practitioners, these or engineers, okay, they have to abide to certain rules, just like auditors do. Okay, so they also have to comply at the end of the day to some sort of code. Okay, so it's important, because they're going to sign off the financial statements, the middle report. So we've only chosen to have auditors in that case, but they have to it's not only in the sense of the code, but in all other areas as well. They have to abide in. Okay, so it comes down to regulation and corporate governance at the end of the day, because this is a worldwide problem. It's not only European, but European has decided to go that way. Thank you.
Going back to my point, I think that we need to define public interest is really broad. Which stakeholder we want to approach with our code? The sustainability report, for instance, I went to UK at the end of last year, and most of the investors, at least the ones that I talk with, they are more interested in if the company is B Corp certified, because the sustainability report, if you are a B Corp certified type of company, the sustainability report is just will put in words what you have, and you need to, in order to be a B Corp certified company, you know, you are a sustainable company. So that's, I think that's the main point. We need to make sure, because public interest, we are like really broad. We need to make sure which public do you want to approach, at least first, the code? Is it the regulator? Is it the investors? You know, any particular sector and so on, because other than that, you know, we will not see the code, our code applied, because will be another, you know, standard that yes, maybe, but for instance, for Brazilian companies, if there are a lot of B Corp companies right now in Brazil, as an investor, to be honest, I don't look at the sustainability report. It's so broad. We don't have a standard there. I look at, oh, this is a B Corp corporation, you know, a B Corp certified company, so I'll invest in this company.
Thanks. James?
I think the comments, concerns so far are extremely helpful, you know, very pragmatic, very realistic. I just wanted to share a story. I was engaging with a CFO, a CEO, and they said, you're going down this path. You as an accountant, you can say you've acted with integrity, you were independent, you had objectivity with good faith, due care, etc. And so can I. And I sign off and I produce my reports and I say, I've done that. And I'm confident I've done that. And he said, so what's the difference? Where are you going? The only answer I had, which he accepted, was I had a basis for concluding on those elements. And the one element that I see, I look through a number of codes of ethics. They're very thin. Act with integrity, be ethical, be honest, be objective, but nothing behind it. So the code actually has a mechanism. It's this conceptual framework, which basically says, think about your threats, create some safeguards, and there's a couple of prohibitions you don't go past. And I think we're getting a little caught up in transporting the code into new environments, and I get that. That's a challenge. One of the biggest challenges is if you have people that you want to take care of, you have to start taking care of those individuals. And that's a different regime and mandate of the board. But having said that, I take a look at that and I like some of the ideas. There are groups that have influential parts within the system. They have codes, and maybe it's a diagnostic exercise just to let them know that your representatives, your members, who you ask them to comply, have no mechanism within your construct to conclude. And we have one. We have a conceptual framework, we have a thought process, and we have avenues in certain areas. We're not saying adopt the code. We might be saying, think about what we've done, and can you start incorporating and including that within? And maybe I'm starting very small, but that's the thought process. It could be promising. I don't mean to create more questions, but that's the lens I had in terms of the value proposition of what we're talking about. And I think if we think about that, it may avoid some of these obstacles and barriers. Very valid, very big, and you've all expressed them in very clear ways. But I don't want us to lose the sight of what I think is a value is we operationalize ethical thinking and decision-making to dilemmas through a mechanism within the code. I'm not saying adopt the code, but how can our thinking help others in their development of ethical frameworks through their group? Thanks.
Steve, 30 seconds.
Yeah, and I guess to push back on that, James, how do I reconcile your point with every listed company, or I should say every major listed company, has a really robust code of ethics with required code of ethics trainings, hours and hours per year. You almost have to do this quarterly. I'm talking from a financial service perspective. You've got a second line of defense, compliance departments that are all over you. I mean, all over you, from personal trading policies to how you're interpreting the financial statements and signing off on this. And you've got internal audit. I mean, there are checks and lines of defense here. So if a company is operating the way they should, again, I go back to my earlier point. It just feels like it may be a little duplicative. That's all.
Thank you, Stephen. It's been a very long session, but I think it's been very stimulating because you've got lots and lots of similar views, but also some watch outs and some challenges, which obviously you have heard. And I see Gabriella's taken copious notes. I don't think there's a word that you've uttered which isn't down on in her writing pad. You knew that this is not for today. You know, this is the start of a conversation, and to get lots of input, and you will continue to do a lot of outreach to really get, you know, to get a better understanding of what's the best way if you want to go forward to approach it. And you know, you've heard things like partnerships. There are others who do things. Can we work with them on that, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, I take this as a sign of encouragement that this is important to everyone. That's why everyone around here has spoken. And I'm sure that we will have this on our agenda for several meetings to come. I'm not a betting person, but I would expect that. I'll leave that to you to decide, obviously. But I mean, thank you really very much, and I hope Jeff and Ken and your colleagues, you've been stimulated by the conversation. You've not been threatened by what you've heard by any means. You see this as great input, free input, by the way, yeah, because you know, if you went outside to people who have paid lots of money, you would be paying a fortune for this free information. So take it for what it is, and leverage it going forward. Thank you. So this really does bring us to the end of the sort of the meeting. But before, and we will have, as you know, on the agenda, we're going to have a SAC members only sort of closed session, and then we will have, a private session, and then we'll have a closed session where we will bring our colleagues from the SSBs back with us. But before we go into that, I'd like to just invite Robert Buchanan, who is on the board of the PIOB. He's also the chair of the IFEA Foundation, and he's been observing the meeting for the past 2 days. He's been very quiet in the corner, but I can assure you he's taken lots of notes himself. What I'd like to do, Robert, if I may, is to ask you, first of all, to give some remarks, you know, on your observation for the past 2 days. And also, maybe you might want to express the PIOB's sort of public interest position in relation to some of the projects that we've discussed over the past 2 days. So with that, my hand over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thank you to everyone for the opportunity to be here with you and to listen to such stimulating discussion as we've just been having in the last hour or so and across the 2 days. My objective with this meeting has been to listen and to see how the dynamic within the group starts and develops over the 2 days, and to try to meet everyone individually and speak to everyone individually. And there are some people I think that I haven't got to, but most of you I have been able to meet and talk to either at the function last night or just on the sides of the meeting. So I do want to just thank you all individually on behalf of the PIOB who appointed you for coming to the meeting, and for the time that you've given, and for the depth of the insights that you've expressed around the table. I came to this ecosystem as a PIOB member just as the monitoring group reforms were being published. It was just as the pandemic was getting underway. I personally had 2 or 3 years sitting in New Zealand in the middle of the night as being my only way that I interacted with my PIOB colleagues and with the standard setting board chairs and with the monitoring group as we were designing the new foundation, which I now have the honour of being the chair trustee of. And so in the last couple of years, it's been great to get back into in-person meetings again, and this is a very valuable example of that. But one of the themes in that monitoring group report, which came out in 2020, was a shift in the role of the PIOB. I'd been a national standard setter beforehand. I chaired the New Zealand Standard Setting Board, and my perception from that position of the PIOB was that it sat in judgment on standards at the end of the process and said yay or nay. But there was a deliberate shift in the monitoring group's report, which was really can be described as a more collaborative approach. And a much more open and transparent approach to identifying and working through public interest issues within this ecosystem. So our role now as the PIOB is to, aside from appointing members of the standard setting boards and appointing this council, is to oversee the work of the two standard setting boards to ensure that both the outcome of their work, the standards they produce, but also their processes are responsive to the public interest. And we do this now by collaborating and rather than sitting in judgment as certainly I had perceived it before. And I mention this because I think the establishment of the SAC, this council, is a very key part of that shift in approach. And Paul Munter, the monitoring group chair, is sitting at the back of the room. And Paul, I'm sure you would reinforce the point that this more open and collaborative approach to identifying public interest issues is something which the establishment of this council and the meeting that we've had is going to be very important for. So the group was, for that reason, deliberately established as a large group with a large mix of geographical backgrounds, but also professional backgrounds. And as you've been getting to know each other around the table, you've, I'm sure, been able to see the different backgrounds. And I did note Dr. Lawal has gone now, but I think he made a comment yesterday about the importance of leveraging off this diversity, the geographical diversity, but also the professional diversity and the diversity in backgrounds. So ultimately, of course, the public interest is, well, it's hard to define, but ultimately it is about, in this context, it's about the user of the information that's produced, financial or non-financial information, and it's about enhancing trust and confidence. And that's reflected in the terms of reference for this group. The terms of reference are, as you will all know, because you will have read them, I'm sure, they're pitched at a high level. They're pitched at a strategic level. And the aim is for this council to develop its work in a way which will provide insights to the standard setting boards really about their strategies and their work plan priorities rather than at the individual project level, which is what the previous consultative advisory groups did. And so we have at this first meeting needed to delve into some detail in individual projects. But I think on reflection and having observed that, I think that's been a good thing because it's provided a focus for a new group. But I would hope as an observation from someone who's been involved in the development of this, that as you move forward, the focus of the meetings will be less project focused and certainly not technical focused, much more at the strategic level. And I have no doubt, Alan, that you'll be able to guide the council in doing that as it moves forward. So congratulate you on the 2 days. It's been very demanding. There's been a lot of information, but I've taken copious notes, and I can assure you that I'll take a lot of information back to the PIOB, which will be very helpful for our observers as they continue to observe the work of the two standard setting boards. So Alan, you asked just for a couple of points about some of the projects. One of our roles at the PIOB is to not approve, but to note the content of the strategic work plans of the two boards, and we did that at our meeting in Madrid just 3 weeks ago for the two SWPs, as we call them, for the boards. We support the direction of both of those plans, and for the IAASB, I wanted to say that this very much includes, from our perspective, endorsing the emerging approach which Tom has talked about in relation to the evidence project and the technology, building and weaving the technology response into that and the risk response, a broader approach to look at a number of ICEs in addition to the evidence standard. We're very supportive of that. We think that that will be of great benefit to in the public interest to regulators, but also ultimately to assurance providers or auditors themselves. So we're very supportive of that. And for the IAASB, we're very supportive of this, the work that has been discussed in the last 2 days on firm culture and governance being looked at, and the topic that we've just talked about now being looked at. But I think it's been very helpful today to have had a reinforcement of the caveats which, Gabriella, you're already aware of. And I think it was a year ago when I was observing an IAASB meeting and you made the point about not straying into corporate governance in this area of preparer information. So it's been on your radar for quite a long time, and to have the breadth of comments around the table on that today has been very helpful. And we are supportive of the IAASB treading carefully down this path with a broad blue sky canvas to start with, but scoping it down as they proceed. And I'm sure that's the way the board will proceed. I just wanted to say something quickly about the sustainability projects. We have been very supportive of both boards in developing their sustainability work. The IAASB is, of course, a little bit more advanced than the IAASB is on its work streams. What is imperative is that the two boards continue to work together through the balance of this year, and that although the two pieces of work don't necessarily need to be fully convergent, the alignment of terminology and definitions and is very important, and the struggle for simplicity, I think, is one of the big challenges which the IAASB has over the next period of time. And another point in relation to that is, which hasn't been talked about much in these 2 days, is the work that the IAASB is doing on experts is very important to us, because of the way in which the market for sustainability assurance work is likely to develop. External experts are going to be used by whichever providers, and so it's very important for the IAASB to complete that work in tandem with the sustainability work. And finally, just ongoing concern. It was a useful discussion yesterday. It mirrored a lot of discussions which have been going on all around the world over the last few months. I myself have sat in on several discussions in both Australia and New Zealand on the topic. There was quite a lot of similarity in the discussion yesterday, but we have been very supportive of the initiation of the project by the IAASB, and the need, the public interest driving need to increase the level of work effort and disclosure and reporting in relation to going concerns. So I'll certainly take the results of the discussion back yesterday. There are different views, and the IAASB will need to deliberate and form a view on that. But we are very supportive of that work and the work on fraud as well. So I hope, Alan, that's a useful summary of where we are. And can I just conclude again by thanking you very much for the opportunity to be here, and I'm very interested in your statement yesterday that you hope that the work of the boards can proceed between meetings. So we'll be interested to see how that goes, and I'll look forward to being back here with you in New York in a few months.
Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate you. You've probably come the furthest to New York, if my knowledge of the world map is right. So thank you very much. You've always been very supportive of this. I'd also like to thank Paul as the monitoring group chair, because he's been very instrumental in getting us to where we are today. As I said yesterday, it's been a long journey, but we're here now. We've landed, and I think we landed well. I'd like to just quickly, if I may, invite Gabriella and then Tom, if you've got any final remarks. You will come back when we sort of have our final session, but just because we're still in the open session, I think it's important for you to just make a few closing remarks, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. I'm going to be very brief because all that I would like to say can be summarized in a great thank you to all of you for this great meeting. This is exactly what we need, and I'm already looking forward for the next meeting in the autumn here in New York at the stage where we are mostly at the IAASB starting new projects, if I may call them so, because they are still work streams. Where we need very strategic input and consideration. These kind of conversations and dialogue are, precious to us. So I'm very grateful to all of you. This exceeded largely my expectations in terms of commitment of the SAC members, the quality of the interventions, the preparation, which is not something that we always see here. So this has been precious for us, and let me just reiterate my thankfulness for what happened in this room yesterday and today, and also for the conversations besides around the meeting, which are usually as precious as the conversations here at the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan, I've seen we've gone out of focus on the screen right now. It's all blurry, which may be indicative of how you all feel about me at this point. But thank you so much for, first of all, agreeing to serve. This was a really rich conversation here. As you can see, we're trying to tackle issues that will have long-term impact. To me, I go back to what I said at the start, that this isn't just about the technicalities of standard setting. This is about developing standards that will enhance a profession that's invaluable to global markets and global economy. We need it to be respected, attractive for future generations. And so the choices we're making from a standard setting perspective today will have long-term impact. So that's really what this is about. And so thank you for that. Other than that, I knew many of you beforehand, but for those who I did not, you know that our door is always open. Please do not wait till the next meeting to interact with us next. Like if you have comments or feedbacks or something's on your mind even, just ping us. You now know who we are. I always say that it does us no good to get input at the last second. Like decisions are already relatively made. Like we take our due process seriously, but there's always time to influence. And particularly this group has a special place in our due process and in our board's hearts right now. So thank you very much. I wanted to also thank all the team that did an enormous amount of work in preparing for this session, which is sort of in between the board cycles. So a lot of work is still happening. So thank you for that. And for the team that actually supports and makes this event happen so smoothly, and Michelle and all IT team and facilities and everyone like that too. So everyone, safe travels back. I look forward to being chastised when we come back after your private session. But we will also try to make this experience even better for you next time. Thank you.
And of course, a great thank you to Alan Johnson for serving as our chair, for inspiring us, and for making this meeting so successful.
Thank you, Gabriella. Thank you. The chair's job is made easy when you have such a wonderful group of people. So thank you very much. I'd like to reiterate the point you just made, Tom, thanking your teams, both teams, because there's so much work that goes on in the background that we don't necessarily see here. I've had the privilege of interacting with them over the last few weeks and putting the agenda together. And I know how hard they've worked, particularly with the time difference, because I'm in Europe and they're they're here and everywhere, in fact, doing their day jobs as well. So thank you for that. I'd also like to thank IFAC because they've given us the wonderful facility and all the support they've given us. I've referred to the quality of the lunch, which I can compare with what I used to get when I was here with another hat on. I'd like to thank them for doing that. I hope they're not charging you for this because you know, you've got no money in the kitty. But anyway, thanks for that. I'd like to, of course, thank all my colleagues for the wonderful contributions. We'll come back, you know, in private.